Ethan Cole had built an empire from nothing, earning the title of the coldest, most ruthless CEO in New York. But for all his power, he had nothing waiting for him at home, just silence and regret. 5 years earlier, he had walked away from his marriage, convinced love was a distraction he couldn't afford. He told himself he'd never look back. But fate never forgets. One phone call shattered the life he thought was untouchable. His ex-wife Leila lay in a hospital bed after a sudden collapse. But what shook Ethan to his core wasn't her fragile frame hooked up to wires, it was the two small boys by her side. Boys with his eyes. Boys who looked at him with confusion, hope, and a single word that made his heart stop. Dad. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized money couldn't save him from the truth. Ethan Cole's life ran on precision. Meetings at 9, flights at noon, dinners with investors at 7. His days were measured in contracts signed, profits secured, and empires expanded. He was known in every boardroom as the man who never faltered, the CEO whose heart beat only for business. But one call shattered the illusion. Mr. Cole, it's about Leila. She's in the hospital. The voice of the nurse was calm, but those words cracked something inside Ethan that no corporate betrayal or financial loss ever had. Leila, her name echoed in his chest, a name he hadn't let himself say out loud in 5 long years. He left everything behind: the polished table, the unfinished deal, the assistants calling his name. The car ride blurred into sirens and red lights. For the first time in forever, Ethan didn't care about being late. He only cared about reaching her. When he walked into the stark white hospital room, he wasn't ready. Leila lay on the bed, her face pale, wires tracing across her fragile body. She looked smaller than he remembered, though time had etched quiet strength into her features. But it wasn't her frailty that nearly brought Ethan to his knees. It was the sight of 2 little boys standing protectively by her side. They couldn't have been older than 5. One clutched the edge of her blanket, the other held a toy car so tightly his knuckles turned white. And when their eyes lifted to meet Ethan's, he froze. They had his eyes. The world fell silent. The beeping machines, the shuffling footsteps outside, all of it drowned beneath the pounding of Ethan's heart. Who are they? His voice cracked, barely audible. Leila's lips trembled. Her voice was weak but steady. They're your sons, Ethan. The words ripped through him. Sons, not strangers, not distant possibilities. Sons. One of the boys tilted his head, studying him with a curiosity that stabbed Ethan's chest. Then, in a whisper, he spoke the word that undid years of carefully built walls. Dad. Ethan staggered back a step, as if the word itself had struck him. He wanted to speak, to deny, to explain, but his throat closed. He had faced hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, global crises, but he had never faced this. Memories slammed into him. Leila's laughter in their tiny first apartment. The arguments that tore them apart. The night he walked out without looking back. He thought he had left behind only pain. He never imagined he had left behind 2 lives as well. Leila's eyes burned into his. I didn't tell you because you weren't ready. You wanted the world. Ethan and I couldn't let you walk in and out of theirs the way you did with mine. Her voice broke on the last word. Ethan felt the weight of every decision he had made crash onto his shoulders. I didn't know, he whispered. The boy with the toy car clutched his brother's hand. They didn't understand the history. All they knew was that a stranger stood in their mother's room, and she had called him their father. Ethan wanted to run. His instinct screamed at him to escape, to bury this truth beneath contracts and boardrooms. But for the first time, his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he stepped closer. His hands trembled as he reached out, not to the boys, not yet, but to the edge of Leila's bed. What happened to you? He asked softly. She looked away, her eyes shining. Exhaustion. Stress. Too many nights alone. Too much weight on my shoulders. But I'm still here. Still here. And somehow, despite everything, she had raised 2 boys who now stared at him with questions he wasn't sure he could ever answer. The eldest spoke again, his voice firmer this time. Are you really our dad? Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to answer yes, to claim them instantly, but shame burned too deep. He looked into their hopeful eyes, then back at Leila, and realized this wasn't a question he could answer with words. It would take more than promises. It would take staying. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole, the man who had conquered everything, faced something he didn't know how to win, and it terrified him. The days after that hospital visit blurred into something Ethan wasn't prepared for. He stayed, at first telling himself it was only temporary until Leila recovered, until the boys felt safe. But deep down, he knew the truth. Walking away again was no longer an option. Yet, Staying came with battles he had never fought. Before. The first was with Leela. You can't just appear after 5 years and expect them to accept you, she said one evening, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. She was propped against her pillows, arms crossed. As Ethan sat across the room in a stiff chair that suddenly felt like a courtroom bench. I don't expect anything, he said quietly. I want to try. Her eyes narrowed. Try. They're children, Ethan, not a business deal you can negotiate. Trying isn't enough. They need consistency. They need someone who doesn't walk away when it gets hard. Her words sliced through him, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. She was right. The second battle was with the boys. Jacob, the younger one, was shy but curious. He would inch closer during story time, slip drawings under Ethan's hand when he thought he wasn't looking. Elijah, the older, was different. He watched Ethan with guarded eyes, as though waiting for proof that this stranger really belonged. One evening, as Ethan fumbled with a bedtime story, Elijah asked the question Ethan dreaded most. Why weren't you here when we were little? The room went silent. Leela glanced at Ethan, her face unreadable. Ethan closed the book, his hands shaking slightly. Because I didn't know, he said honestly. If I had known, I would have been here. Elijah studied him, skeptical. But you know now. Are you going to leave again? The question hit harder than any corporate betrayal Ethan had endured. He leaned forward, forcing himself to meet his son's eyes. No, he said firmly. Not now. Not ever. I can't change the past, Elijah, but I can choose the future. And I choose you, both of you. The boy didn't answer, but that night, when he fell asleep, his hand rested lightly against Ethan's arm. The third battle was with himself. For years, Ethan had measured his worth by numbers, profits, percentages, deals closed. Now he found himself struggling with spilled cereal, messy drawings, and two small voices calling for him at once. It was chaos, a kind he didn't know how to control. And yet, he didn't hate it. He learned to pack lunches, though the sandwiches were uneven. He learned which blanket Elijah insisted on at night, and how Jacob liked his pancakes shaped like stars. He burned more meals than he cooked. But the boys laughed anyway. Every small failure felt like a victory. But just as Ethan began to feel like he was building something real, a new storm rolled in. It came in the form of a letter. Amber's former boyfriend Colin had filed a petition for visitation rights. He claimed he had been a father figure to the boys while Ethan was gone and deserved a place in their lives. The words made Ethan's blood boil. He remembered Lila's one hesitant mention of Colin, the unease in her voice. He had never been a father, he had been a shadow. Someone who filled the silence without taking responsibility. And now, when Ethan was finally stepping up, this man wanted to stake a claim. Ethan's business instincts flared. He called his lawyer, demanded strategies, and began preparing as if for the biggest deal of his life. But this wasn't about money or power. It was about family. When he finally told Leela, she didn't cry or shout. She simply sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her voice quiet. He doesn't want them, she said. He wants control. He always did. Ethan placed his hand over hers. Then we'll show the court the truth. What the boys know, what you and I know. But he wasn't naive. He could already see the toll it was taking. Elijah grew quieter. Jacob clung closer, and bedtime questions grew harder. Will we have to leave again? Are you still our dad if someone else says he wants to be? Ethan knelt before them, choosing his words carefully. Listen to me. No matter what happens, I'm not leaving. You are my sons, not just by blood, but by choice. And I will fight for you, every single day. The boys didn't fully understand, but something in his tone seemed to reach them. The court date loomed closer, and Ethan lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that had brought him here. Once, he would have faced this battle with arrogance. But now, he felt only fear of losing the two little boys who had unknowingly become his entire world. Still, beneath the fear, a quiet resolve took root. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It wasn't about proving himself to Lila or to the world. It was about two boys who deserved a father, and Ethan was finally ready to be that man. The courtroom was colder than Ethan expected. Marble walls, polished benches. The faint echo of footsteps, it all reminded him of the countless legal battles he had fought and won in his career. But this one was different. This wasn't about millions of dollars or corporate power. This was about two little boys sitting nervously beside their mother. Elijah held Jacob's hand tightly. Both of them dressed in neatly pressed shirts that made them look far too grown up for their ages. Ethan sat just behind them, his heart pounding harder than it had during any merger. Across the aisle sat Colin, smug in his tailored suit, as though this was just another game for him to win. He leaned back, arms folded, a confident smirk tugging at his lips. Ethan's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay still. This wasn't about rage. This was about love. The judge began, her voice steady. "We are here to determine visitation rights concerning the minors, Elijah and Jacob Cole." Hearing their names spoken aloud sent a strange warmth through Ethan's chest. Cole, his sons. Colin's lawyer stood first, speaking of stability, of the years Colin had spent present in the boys' lives. Ethan listened, each word twisting like a knife. Colin painted himself as a guardian, a man who had stepped in when Ethan had abandoned his family. When it was Ethan's turn, he rose slowly. The room felt suffocating, but when he looked at Elijah and Jacob, he found his strength. "I won't stand here and pretend I was perfect," he began. "I made mistakes that cost me years I can never get back, but I didn't know my sons existed, and now that I do, I will never walk away again. Not because of obligation, not because of blood, but because I love them. They are my life now." He paused, his voice catching. A real father isn't the man who fills a chair at the table. He's the man who shows up every morning, every night, through every scraped knee and bedtime story. And that's who I intend to be for Elijah and Jacob, for the rest of my life. The courtroom fell silent. For a moment, even Colin's smugness faltered. But the most powerful testimony didn't come from Ethan or Lila. It came from Elijah. When the judge gently asked if he wanted to say anything, the boy stood, his small hands trembling but his voice steady. "I know my dad wasn't here before," he said, glancing back at Ethan, "but he's here now. He makes breakfast even if it burns. He reads the stories even if he forgets the words. And when I ask if he's leaving, he says no. He stays. That's my dad." Jacob nodded fiercely, clutching his brother's hand. "We want him. We want our dad." Tears blurred Ethan's vision. For the first time in years, he didn't care about appearances. He let them fall. The judge's ruling was clear. Colin's petition was denied. Custody remained with Lila, and Ethan was granted full rights as their father. Relief crashed over him like a wave. But it wasn't victory, he felt. It was gratitude. Gratitude for a second chance he didn't deserve but had been given anyway. That night, back at Lila's house, the atmosphere was lighter than it had been in weeks. The boys laughed as Ethan chased them through the living room, their giggles echoing louder than any applause he had ever received. Lila watched from the doorway, her eyes soft, though guarded still. When the boys finally collapsed into bed, exhausted from laughter, Ethan stood in the quiet kitchen with her. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he corrected. "We did it. And them. They chose me." Lila studied him for a long moment. "I don't know if I can ever forget the past, Ethan, but I see the man you're trying to be now, and maybe that's enough to start again." Hope flickered in his chest, fragile but real. He didn't push. He knew healing would take time, but for the first time, he believed they had one. Later, as he tucked the boys in, Elijah's sleepy voice broke the silence. "Dad." Ethan brushed a hand through his son's hair. "Yeah. Promise you'll still be here tomorrow." Ethan's throat tightened. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I promise. Tomorrow, and every tomorrow after that." The boy smiled, drifting into sleep. Jacob, half asleep already, whispered, "Love you, Dad." And in that moment, Ethan realized something he had never understood before. He had spent years chasing an empire, building towers of glass and steel to prove his worth. But true legacy wasn't in buildings or profits. It was in the small, messy, perfect family he had almost lost. He hadn't just found his sons in that hospital room, he had found himself. Sometimes, life doesn't give second chances. Ethan Cole knew that better than anyone, but fate had other plans. From a cold, ruthless CEO to a man who finally understood the meaning of love, his journey wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the two boys who looked at him and called him Dad, and the woman he had once lost but now vowed never to let go again. This story isn't just about redemption. It's about family, forgiveness, and fighting for what truly matters. Because at the end of the day, success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional tales of love, sacrifice, and second chances. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.